What if I told you that deep in the Alabama woods, something pale and heartless is watching from the tree line that doesn't belong to this world? Since the early 1900s, a silent nightmare has stalked the northern counties, a legend older than the roads themselves. Tonight, we dive into 3 Appalachian Mountains horror stories inspired by real, documented encounters. A World War II veteran followed home by a silent passenger, a group of girls whose camping trip became a hunt, and a seasoned woodsman who realized too late that he was the bait. Something is screaming in the hollows, and it's calling your name. I'm the Shadow Teller. Lock your doors and let the nightmare begin. Imagine surviving World War II, seeing your best friend die and losing an arm, only to come home to a wife who wants a divorce. Grover thought he had nothing left to lose. He thought he had survived his own personal hell. But at 2 a.m. on a lonely mountain road, he encountered a new kind of hell that would change his life forever. I want a divorce. Grover didn't swerve. He didn't yell. He simply adjusted the rearview mirror with his remaining hand. In the vibrating glass, his own eyes stared back. They looked older than 24, hollowed out by shrapnel, jungle rot, and the things he had left in the mud overseas. An exhausted acceptance settled into his chest, right next to the phantom itch of a left arm that wasn't there anymore. He had survived the war, but now, miles deep in the Appalachian Mountains, he was losing his life back home. He was entirely, utterly alone. It was 6:30 p.m. The 1939 Ford rattled down the potholed back road, the suspension groaning with every impact. Grover drove with one hand, his left sleeve pinned up and fluttering in the drafty cab like a flag of surrender. A metal flask tapped against his thigh, a nervous tick, a necessary vice. Beside him, Lucille picked at a loose thread on her dress. Regret radiated from her, but the silence between them was too thick, too heavy to break. The roof liner detached. The rotting fabric grazed the top of Grover's buzz cut, blocking the rearview mirror with a crumbling curtain of decay. Lucille sighed, a sharp, aggressive exhale. She reached up and jammed a thumbtack back into the ceiling. Push, twist. The motion was small but violent, a desperate attempt to fix a car that was falling apart, much like the marriage ending in the front seat. By sunset, the road had become a tunnel of kudzu, green vines choking the trees on either side. The destination was a welcome home party neither of them wanted to attend. "Just try to smile," Lucille pleaded, her voice barely rising above the engine whine. A high-pitched, wet scream cut through the argument. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded exactly like a woman being murdered in the ditch. "Grover, stop! That's a person!" Lucille gripped the dashboard, her knuckles white. Grover's boot hovered over the brake. But his combat instinct kicked in before the car could slow. The hair on his neck stood up. The cadence was wrong. The lung capacity was too deep. Certainty, born from seeing death up close, flooded his mind. That wasn't human. "It's a bobcat, Luce, just a bobcat." The lie came out flat, clinical. He tightened his grip on the wheel and floored it. The transmission whined in protest, but the car surged forward. The scream faded into the fog behind them, but the fear crawled into the back seat and stayed there. At 8 p.m., the farmhouse stood as a bright island in a sea of black timber. Smoke and fiddle music poured from the open windows. Inside, a tight circle of men offered back slaps and handshakes. "Good to have you back, son," they cheered, ignoring the empty sleeve. Grover plastered on a smile, playing the part of the returning hero, but under the skin he drifted. The noise was too loud. The heat was too oppressive. Across the crowded room, Lucille stood near the punch bowl. She laughed at something the pastor's wife said, her head thrown back, throat exposed. She looked radiant, flushed with a lightness absent for years. Joy hit him hard. She was beautiful, but the joy curdled instantly into crushing leaden doom. She was happy in that moment, but that happiness didn't include him. The divorce wasn't a threat. It was a promise. She was already gone, and the room spun, the walls closed in. Therefore, Grover turned away. He stepped onto the porch, the screen door slamming behind him. 2 whiskeys deep, he struck a match, the flare illuminating the hollows of his face. Smoke curled into the night air. He squinted toward the tree line 50 yards out where the yard lights died. Something white moved between the trunks. It wasn't snow, it wasn't a deer. The shape shifted, unfolding upward until it stood nearly 7 feet tall. Slick, white fur glowed with a sickly luminescence in the moonlight. It didn't move like an animal, it stood perfectly still, watching the house. Grover rubbed his eyes hard. It had to be the liquor, or the stress, or the war following him home. He flicked his cigarette butt into the darkness, turning his back on the warning. 2 a.m. the return trip. They entered the triangle. Locals knew better than to stop in this stretch of hollow. Stories of tourists vanishing here were told to children as warnings, not fairy tales. But Grover was too tired and too angry to care about ghosts. The roofliner fell completely. A sheet of rotting fabric draped over Grover's face, blinding him. At the same moment, the passenger headlight strobed violently, plunging the road into alternating fits of light and shadow. Grover snapped. The brakes locked up. The Ford skidded on the loose gravel, coming to a harsh halt in the middle of the road. "I am done," he snarled. "I am fixing this damn thing right now." Grover snatched the heavy metal flashlight from the glove box. Lacking a left hand to steady it, he clamped the cold steel tube between his clenched teeth. He kicked the door open, his boots sinking into the roadside mud. The humid night air rushed in as Grover marched to the front of the car. He pounded his fist against the flickering fender, trying to jar the connection loose. The light flickered once more and died completely. Darkness took over. For a long minute, silence pressed against his ears. "What is that?" Lucille whispered from inside the cab. Grover froze. He turned his head, the flashlight beam cutting a shaky path through the fog, illuminating the road ahead of the car. Nothing. Just mist and vines waiting in the dark. "No," she wheezed, the words laced with pure terror. "Behind the car." Grover pivoted. The beam swept past the rusted fender and hit the trunk. The anomaly was there. 20 feet away, it stood 8 feet tall, a tower of slick muscle looming over the road. It had no face, just a smooth, pale surface where features should be. Its arms hung low, past its knees, ending in hands that looked disturbingly human. Grover had seen men die in the mud. He had seen bodies torn apart by mortars. He had felt the cold grip of death in the jungle. But staring at this thing, a new primal terror seized his heart. This wasn't the logical violence of World War II. This wasn't a soldier fighting a soldier. This was prey meeting a predator that didn't follow the laws of physics. The fear wasn't in his head, it was in his marrow. The creature's chest hitched. A scream erupted from the faceless head. It mocked the sound of a woman, a blast of noise smelling of ozone and wet dog. Grover scrambled backward, boots slipping on the asphalt. The driver's seat offered the only sanctuary. He threw himself inside and slammed the door. "Go, go!" Lucille shrieked, her fingernails digging into his shoulder. He twisted the key. Click, click. The engine roared to life. Grover slammed the gear shift into first. Mud sprayed in a brown rooster tail. The tires caught gravel, and the Ford launched forward, fishtailing onto the asphalt. He didn't let up. The speedometer vibrated past 60 on the winding mountain road. Minutes later, the adrenaline began to curdle into a cold sweat. Lucille wasn't pulling away. She wasn't picking at loose threads. She clung to his empty, pinned-up sleeve, her head resting on his shoulder. No talk of divorce, just holding on. Grover's heart hammered against his ribs. He risked a glance at the rearview mirror, expecting to see his own haunted, lonely eyes staring back. But the mirror angle had shifted. He didn't see his eyes. Reflected in the glass, two glowing red orbs hovered in the darkness of the back road, reflecting the taillights, watching them go. Grover saw the red eyes watching from the road. But our next group of friends is about to learn that in these mountains, some things don't just watch. They answer when you whistle. Why do the elders in Etowah County tell you never to whistle in the woods after dark? It isn't because of the bears, and it isn't because of the poachers. It's because the limestone valleys of the southern Appalachian Mountains get lonely. There are things in the deep tree line that mimic the sound of a crying woman, just to see if you are polite enough to check on her. In 1968, 3 girls went up to Moody's Chapel to celebrate their future, but the Appalachian night had other plans. Darlene sat on a mossy log, the damp cold of the earth seeping into her jeans. Across the fire, Linda threw her hands up, her shadow stretching long and distorted against the trees. And when she looked in the mirror, Linda whispered, dropping her voice to a theatrical husk. Her own reflection blinked. Darlene tapped the face of her watch. Tap, tap, tap. She did it 3 times, a nervous tic she developed in study hall. She wasn't checking the time. She was trying to freeze it. She touched the nursing school acceptance letter in her pocket, the paper sharp against her hip. This trip wasn't just a party. It was a funeral for their childhood. She looked at Linda, obsessing over her lipstick, and Beverly, who was scraping grease from under her fingernails with a case knife. They were drifting apart, Linda to marriage, Beverly to the local garage, and Darlene to a city 4 hours away. I'm the only one who knows this is the end, she thought, a wave of bittersweet affection tightening her chest. She wanted to be the adult, to protect them, but she also just wanted to stay here, in the glow of the fire, before the real world tore them apart. I'm leaving them behind, and I'm already alone. I need to drain the radiator, Linda announced, breaking the spell. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. Don't tell the ghost stories while I'm gone. She vanished past the circle of light into the rhododendrons. Beverly stood up and kicked a log. The sparks flew upward, dying before they hit the branches. Mosquitoes are eating me alive out here. Let's wait in the tent, Darlene said, eager to keep the group contained. I brought the lantern. They moved 10 feet away to the large, canvas family-sized tent pitched in the clearing. Inside, the space felt safe, smelling of old canvas and mildew. Darlene lit the small propane lantern, casting a warm, hissing yellow glow against the walls. They sat cross-legged on the sleeping bags, and Darlene pulled out the Ouija board. Ask it if Billy likes me, Beverly smirked, her tough mechanic exterior cracking just enough to show the teenager underneath. Darlene laughed, her fingers resting lightly on the planchette. Is there a spirit here who thinks Beverly needs a bath? The planchette didn't move, but they giggled, the sound echoing in the small canvas room. For a moment, the future didn't matter. They were just girls in a tent. But then the silence broke. A heavy, wet impact vibrated through the ground, followed by the sick snap of a branch breaking under massive weight right outside the tent wall. The laughter died in their throats. "Oh, crap," Darlene muttered, the guilt spiking instantly. "I wasn't paying attention." She stood up to check on Linda, but a sudden draft swept through the mesh, cold and smelling of ozone. The lantern sputtered and died. Darkness slammed down on them like a coffin lid. Darlene fumbled for the zipper of the mesh door. It was stiff with rust. She yanked it down halfway, just enough to stick her head out into the black void. "Linda?" she called out. The wind ate her voice. Silence answered her. Darlene put 2 fingers to her lips and blew hard, a sharp, piercing wolf whistle. It was their signal, the one they had used since the 3rd grade to find each other in the dark. The whistle echoed off the limestone bluffs and faded. Darlene didn't know it, but in that split second, the rules of the woods had been broken. She had announced herself to the valley. She zipped the mesh back up, her hands trembling slightly, and fumbled for the flashlight. The metal cylinder was slick in her sweating palm. She thumbed the switch. Nothing. She smacked the light against her palm percussively. A yellow beam finally cut the dark. "I'll be right back," she told Beverly. Darlene unzipped the tent mesh again. She poked her head out, aiming the beam past the dying fire toward the woods, and froze. A man was standing right there. He had appeared silently out of the void, instantly upon the whistle, just outside where the firelight used to reach. No crunch of leaves, no snapping twigs. He wore a flannel shirt that looked too stiff, too clean for the woods. "Sorry to scare you," he said. His tone was flat, monotone. "You got any D-cell batteries?" Darlene's heart hammered against her ribs, a physical pain in her chest. "No. My camp is a long ways away," he droned, his eyes unblinking in the harsh flashlight beam. "You got any snacks then?" "No, just water." He shouldn't be here. There were no other campsites for miles, and he had no gear, no light, no weapon. He stared at her a beat too long, his head cocked slightly to the left like a confused dog. "Okay," he said. He stepped backward and vanished into the shadows, as if the night simply swallowed him. Darlene exhaled, her breath shaking. She looked at Beverly, who was gripping her case knife white-knuckled. "Okay, that was weird. I'm going to get Linda. Stay here." Darlene turned toward the tree line. A scream erupted from the bushes, and Linda burst out, laughing hysterically. "Gotcha!" Linda shrieked. Beverly chuckled, but the sound was thin. Darlene forced a smile, but her eyes kept darting back to where the man had been. The laughter felt hollow now. The woods felt heavier. By 3 a.m., the weather turned traitor. Rain assaulted the canvas tent like buckshot, a deafening drum roll that drowned out the world. Darlene was deep in a restless sleep when a hand clamped over her mouth. She woke instantly. Beverly was leaning over her, eyes wide, terror etched into the lines of her face. She pointed to the wall of the tent. Darlene lay paralyzed. "It's him," she thought, the realization turning her blood to ice. The battery man came back. She didn't say it aloud. Saying it would make it real. A vibration hummed through the ground. Something brushed the canvas. It wasn't the wind, it was heavy, solid, muscular. An object traced the perimeter of their sanctuary. A wet hand, or perhaps a paw, slid down the fabric, creating a long, dragging friction sound against the nylon. Darlene tapped her watch in the dark. Tap, tap, tap. 1 second, 2 seconds. She needed to count. If she counted, she was in control. Linda reached for her lipstick, clutching it like a weapon. Beverly gripped the knife, the blade trembling in the gloom. They waited. 20 minutes of silence stretched into eternity. The rubbing stopped, but the presence remained. The air felt heavy, charged with static. Darlene had to be sure. She crawled to the door, her knees sinking into the damp floor. She reached for the zipper. The metal was rusted. She pulled. The sound of tearing metal shrieked through the tent. The zipper stuck halfway. It wouldn't close. It wouldn't open. The barrier was breached. Darlene aimed the flashlight out into the void. The batteries were dying. The beam strobed, yellow, black, yellow, black, creating a terrifying stop-motion film. Flicker. A figure leaned against an oak tree, legs crossed casually like a farmer leaning on a fence. It held a stick to its mouth like a cigarette, mimicking the pose of a human, but the angles were wrong. The knees bent backward. Flicker. Darkness. Flicker. The figure had dropped to the leaves. Its limbs jerked upward, stiff as boards, defying gravity. A marionette with invisible strings. Flicker. Darkness. Flicker. It sat cross-legged now, 10 feet closer. It used large, pale palms to flatten its white hair down against its skull, slicking it back like a wet seal. Flicker. Darkness. Flicker. The jaw unhinged vertically. A sound emanated from the throat, a wet, rhythmic clicking. It was tuning its voice. Final flicker, it stopped moving. Red, glowing eyes locked onto Darlene. The sound hit them, a high-pitched woman screaming mixed with the gurgle of a crying baby. The thing blurred toward them. "Run!" Darlene screamed. But as the creature closed the distance, it jerked violently to the left. It didn't strike them. It darted into the deep woods, flanking them, herding them like cattle. They scrambled out of the tent, bare feet slapping against sharp limestone rocks. Branches whipped Linda's face, drawing lines of blood across her cheeks. Darlene's lungs burned like she had inhaled battery acid. There was no looking back, no stopping to breathe. They reached the car. Darlene's hands shook so violently she dropped the keys in the mud. "Start the damn car, Darlene!" Beverly screamed, slamming the passenger door locked. Darlene clawed the keys up, jammed the metal into the ignition, and twisted. The engine roared. As they dove inside, something heavy and white slammed against the trunk. The car fishtailed, tires spinning in the slush before catching traction on the gravel. They peeled out of the woods, the headlights cutting a frantic path through the trees. Darlene watched the empty road ahead, her knuckles white on the wheel. Beside her, Linda touched her bleeding face, and Beverly stared out the window, the knife still in her hand. We are all broken now, Darlene thought, the realization settling over her like the cold rain as she looked at her friends. But I'm not alone anymore. The taillights disappeared around the bend, leaving the woods in darkness again. Darlene and her friends barely escaped that unhinged jaw, but in the Bankhead National Forest, one man's pride is about to turn him from a hunter into the ultimate bait. Have you ever let your pride lead someone you love straight into hell? Jerry marched his innocent nephew into the woods to prove he was still the king of his land. But when the sun went down, he realized that in the Bankhead National Forest, he wasn't the king, he was the bait. Your daddy thinks he can take the creek bottom, Jerry said. The words tasted like chalk. Over my dead body. Bo didn't look up. He sat on the opposite bench of the rotting deer stand, staring at his brand new boots and picking at a loose thread on his jeans. 19 years old and soft like his daddy. Jerry watched him with a mix of pity and annoyance. The kid hated conflict more than anything. He was only here, 15 feet up in the humid air of the Appalachian Mountains, because he couldn't say no to his uncle. Jerry shook his head in disgust. The air was soup, 95 degrees with humidity that glued his camo shirt to his back. His ulcer flared, a sharp twisting pain in his gut that felt like a drain unclogging. It wasn't just the heat. It was the crushing weight of the secret he was keeping. His brother, Beau's father, was suing him for the land, and the legal fees had already drained the savings. Jerry hadn't told his wife. She thought the empty bank account was a mistake. She didn't know he was here because they couldn't afford groceries. He wasn't hunting for a trophy. He was hunting for meat. If he didn't drop a deer today, they were eating rice for another month. He popped a generic antacid tablet, the crunch loud in the stillness. A shadow swept over the stand. A massive red-tailed hawk dropped from the canopy, talons extended. It wasn't hunting a squirrel. It struck Beau's bright orange hat with kinetic violence. "Get off!" Beau screamed, flailing his arms. "Quit moving, boy!" Jerry barked, his voice harsh. "You're scaring the deer." Beau froze instantly. He was desperate to please, his chest heaving in silence as he adjusted his hat. Jerry nodded, satisfied. He believed he was the alpha. He believed he controlled this space. But the forest was done waiting. The sun dipped below the ridge, stretching shadows across the forest floor like spilled ink. A heavy snap echoed from deep in the laurel thicket. It was too heavy for a squirrel. Jerry strained to listen, the familiar ringing in his ears spiking. Years of unshielded gunfire had left him with severe tinnitus, a constant high-pitched frequency that masked the direction of the noise. He couldn't pinpoint the location. "Go flush it out," Jerry whispered, pointing vaguely toward the tree line. "Probably a buck bedding down." Beau looked at the dark thicket. His eyes widened. He was terrified of the dark, but he loved his uncle more than he feared the trees. He climbed down the ladder. The rotten wood groaned under his weight, a 2x4 twisting as he stepped off. Beau hit the ground and vanished into the green wall of the Appalachia undergrowth. Jerry waited. 3 minutes passed. The silence in the bankhead was heavy, pressing against his eardrums. Then a sound drifted up from the brush. It wasn't a deer. It was a soft, pathetic whimpering. It sounded exactly like a wounded dog. Jerry frowned, leaning over the rail. Before he could call out, the sound changed. The whimpering stopped abruptly. "My legs! Uncle Jerry! My legs!" Beau's scream was raw, wet, and agonizing. It tore through the humidity. Jerry scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Beau!" he shouted, panic seizing his throat. He tried to aim his rifle, sweat pouring into his eyes, but the heat brought company. A swarm of mosquitoes descended on him instantly, drawn to the moisture. They weren't just annoying, they were blinding. They filled his nose and coated his eyelids, forcing him to blink rapidly to clear his vision. Through the blur of tears and insects, he saw it. 15 feet away, perched in a pine tree at eye level with the stand, was a massive pale shape. Pale, muscular hands gripped the bark. Red eyes reflected the fading sun like road flares. Jerry shouldered his rifle, but his ulcer doubled him over, a hot poker in his stomach. Hands shaking, he squeezed the trigger. Bang! The recoil slammed his bad shoulder. The shot went wide, shredding pine needles. He fumbled for the bolt, needing a fresh cartridge, but the brass slipped through fingers slick with sweat and crushed mosquitoes. The bullet bounced off the metal stand and fell into the void, but the hawk returned. Agitated by the gunshot and the flailing, it dove again, talons raking Jerry's scalp and tearing skin. Jerry jerked back instinctively. He slammed his full weight against the rotting railing. Crack! The wood gave way. Gravity took him. He hit the ground hard, the impact snapping his wrist. The air left his lungs in a wheezing whoosh. Jerry lay in the mud. The world spun with vertigo. The ringing in his ears was deafening now, drowning out the forest sounds. He gasped, sucking in air that smelled of copper and rot. He scrambled up, grabbing his rifle with his good hand. But movement flashed in his peripheral vision. Not a run, a blur. the pale shape dropped from the tree. It hit the ground on all fours, moving with unnatural speed. It didn't move like an animal. It zigzagged like static electricity, closing the 30-foot gap in a heartbeat. Jerry raised the barrel. The creature didn't bite. It didn't claw. It slapped. A massive pale hand connected with the rifle barrel. The steel bent at a 90-degree angle. The force ripped the weapon from Jerry's grip and sent it spinning into the darkness. The air pressure from the creature's movement popped Jerry's good ear, plunging him into total silence. He had no weapon, no dignity. He was deaf and broken. Jerry crawled. He dragged himself through the mud and into the kudzu net. The invasive vine, known as the vine that ate the South, blanketed the forest floor in a thick, deceptive green mat. It hid roots, holes, and rotting logs, catching Jerry's ankles and wrapping around his good arm like wire. He pulled himself forward, inch by inch, fighting the vegetation. He bumped into something soft. Bo. The boy was silent. He was passed out, his legs bent at angles that anatomy did not allow. His knees were shattered. Jerry huddled over Bo, trying to shield him with his own body. He pulled his flashlight from his vest, his last tool against the night, but he felt it before he saw it. A vibration in the floorboards of the earth. A heavy, wet breath hit the back of his neck. Jerry clicked the light. The beam cut the dark. The monster stood 10 feet away, fully upright, 8 feet tall. It was a wall of matted, pale fur, slick with rain and sweat. It wasn't attacking. It was watching. It leaned into the light. It opened its jaw, unhinging it like a snake. It screamed at the light. Jerry couldn't hear the sound, but he felt it. The vibration rattled his teeth. It shook his vision. It shut down his brain. Jerry's eyes rolled back, and darkness took him. The next morning, sterile light flooded the room. The rhythmic beeping of machines replaced the forest sounds. Jerry woke up, the smell of antiseptic burning his nose. He looked to his right. Bo lay in the bed next to him. Both legs were in traction, suspended in the air. He would never walk the same again. Jerry looked down at his own hands. They were bandaged and empty. The realization hit him with the force of the fall. He wasn't the alpha. He wasn't the protector. The boy is soft, he had thought. I am small, he knew now. Jerry closed his eyes, but behind his eyelids the pale shape still burned. He realized the land didn't belong to his brother. It didn't belong to the bank. And it certainly didn't belong to him. It belonged to the White Thang in the Bankhead. Jerry learned the hard way that he wasn't the alpha. He was just a visitor in a kingdom ruled by the White Thang. Since the early 1900s, this 10-foot shaggy, pale beast with glowing red eyes has stalked the triangle between Morgan, Etowah, and Jefferson counties. Whether it was watching Grover from the shadows in 1939, mimicking a crying baby to lure Darlene at Moody's Chapel, or dominating the Bankhead National Forest, this creature is known for its supernatural speed and a rotting fish stench that signals its arrival. Most terrifying is its scream, a bone-chilling mimic of a woman in distress used to bait the curious. If you're ever in the Alabama hollows and hear a cry for help where no one should be, don't follow it. If you want more Appalachian horror stories, click the playlist here. I'm the Shadow Teller. Stay safe in the dark.